Maybe you should be more worried about the air you breathe on board and the diseases that can live there. It's a problem some airlines say doesn't even exist. Dispatches, Thursday at 9 on 4.
What's his name now?
Tony Hancock, hero of comedy, tonight at 9 on 4.
This strange little machine is responsible for putting food on the world's table. Invented in 1903, it's the only working example of its kind. More important than the car, the aeroplane, or for that matter, the television. It is the humble tractor. Owned by farmer John Moffat, this early Ivel tractor is one of only 200 ever produced.
Now, it's a bit like a checklist on an aircraft. There's quite a number of things to do, and this is actually the original instruction book for the machine. This is quite precious, actually. I think it's probably the only one left in existence.
The Ivel was the creation of a Bedfordshire bicycle enthusiast, Dan Allbone. Inspired by the motor car, Allbone had a hunch that the horse-drawn plough had had its day. Unluckily for him, it would be another 40 years before the tractor really caught on.
I'll open these two valves, allow the petrol into the top of the cylinder. Right. First time.
Whilst it was the ploughboy's job to look after the horse, only the head carter nurtured the mechanical beast.
There's a great conversion to do with agricultural employees. Naturally, everyone had been used to horses, and then suddenly a piece of fairly high precision engineering was launched into the industry. It was mostly trial and error. They didn't go to schools or anything like that, but there were people that were mechanically inclined, as there are today. So I suppose it was one man's job to look after and service it and run it, and probably no one else was allowed anywhere near it. Obviously, there'd be a person to ride on the plough, the riding plough to steer it, someone on the reaping machines and so on. But the driver would be, as with the steam engines, his task would be to maintain and ensure that the tractor was running effectively.
Few of these new machines were ever sold in Britain, as naturally wary farmers stuck to their horses. It wasn't until the Great War that farmers were forced into thinking about mechanisation. Farm workers and horses were sent to the front, and agriculture was starved of its labour force. Britain faced a food crisis.
Look at the tractor, look at the tractor.
Now aged 105, Land Army girl Jessica Godwin was 22 when the First World War broke out. Two revolutions hit the farmer. Tractors began to replace horses, and women took over as farm labourers. In 1916, Lloyd George's propaganda films urged ladies to join the Women's Land Army. Jessica still remembers the Women's Land Army song.
You ought to join. I can't sing it, you know, I've got no voice. You ought to join the Women's Land Army. 18 bob a week and very little to eat. Blooming great boots make blisters on your feet. You ought to join the Women's Land Army. My word, the boots were terrible. We joined the tractor section, and we were with the tractor girls, and it was very nice indeed. but we only had 6 weeks training. But the mechanic was very clever, and he took the tractor to pieces and showed us every part of it and put it together again. Not that we ever took it apart, but I could do all my own running repairs, you know. I was very proud of that. Oh yes, the farmer said, Mr. Aldwinkle, funny name, wasn't it, Aldwinkle? He came to meet me and he said, I got 18 acres here. Do you think you can plough that? Oh yes, I said. I'd do it in about a week. What?
To Mr. Aldwinkle, an acre a day was good going with a horse and plough, but the tractor speed was breathtaking.
Will you? Oh, he said, you're joking. I said, no, I'm not. But he was so excited, you know, he used to get on the back of the tractor. And, but however, I did it in a week and he was pleased.
Jessica's tractor was an American-built Fordson. While Britain's industry concentrated on guns and shells, the government had neglected the old adage that an army marches on its stomach. The Ministry of Munitions begged Ford of America to produce a tractor for Britain. This Fordson F was bought by Leonard Bosley's father in 1917. Its cast-iron frame and sealed units set the tractor world on fire. Brakes were not part of the package.
We used to step out 22 yards, then stick a stick in, and then go a little bit farther down and stick another 22 yards and put a stick in so that we got it straight for the first time, you see.
A good plough person takes pride in neat furrows. Jessica used a yardstick, just like this one, to make sure she ploughed in a straight line. Half moons, or curved furrows, simply would not do.
I remember my husband saying, I didn't know he was my husband then, you see. She'll have around half moon time she's finished. And I was furious. I never had a half moon. I'd be ashamed to have a half moon. I was straight as a die.
The great advantage of the Fordson F was that the driver could work alone, operating the plough with one hand. As tractors caught on, the way of life in the country began to change. Fewer men and horses would transform the old village blacksmith into a modern agricultural engineer. In 1919, Robert Crawford Sr. was just starting out as a young apprentice.
Yes, this photograph shows father shoeing horses, and then this photograph here, taken a few years after, shows him outside his workshop with the first tractor that he sold. He saw, obviously, the potential that the tractor was bringing to agriculture, and he then told all his customers he wasn't shoeing any more horses, much to the dismay of everybody. He said, well, if he doesn't shoe horses, he'll not be in business long. Well, he started as a one-man blacksmith shop and gradually added another workshop and another workshop until we have what we have today.
When Robert Crawford retires, his son, also Robert Crawford, will be the third generation to carry on the family tradition of agricultural engineering in Lincolnshire. Edward Box Jr., a Wiltshire farmer, is the third generation to look after his family's tractor, the International Titan.
My first memory of the Titan was when I was looking out the window, when it's always parked on the side of the yard. And it used to spend most of its time, summertime, and when it wasn't out with the thrashing machine, parked there. My grandfather bought it from Oakes Brothers in October 1918. He had it delivered. Your horses was commandeered for the war effort, and men as well. So he bought the Titan because it was more versatile. You could go ploughing and cultivating and do the thrashing as well.
This newsreel film of Titans being inspected by General Pitcairn Campbell shows how important food production had become in Britain's efforts to beat the Kaiser. It was shot in the same year as Edward's grandfather bought his Titan.
It cost him £384, which was quite a considerable sum of money in that sort of era. She uses oil, she doesn't have a sump, so you pour oil in and it goes through the bearings and then runs out on the ground. They reckon if we were doing a whole day's work, it uses about a gallon of oil. But it would be a thicker oil than this. It's a little bit thin, and it uses more.
The elaborate starting up procedure has a ritual quality. Just like the horse, the constant loss oiling system means that whatever goes in one end comes out the other. The oil rag is the leg of Dad's pyjamas, and the jug was salvaged from the local army camp in 1918.
When you start, you put some oil in there and then you wind the handle about 25 times so you can hear it coming, squish out in the bearings.
A tractor was as idiosyncratic and unpredictable to operate as a horse, but the Titan was one of the most successful early American tractors. After a lifetime together, Edward gently cajoles the old girl into life.
Oh.
Or at least he tries to.
Oh, sweet. That's better.
International designed the Titan without a radiator. Cooling water kept in a large tank circulates to and from the engine. It gets up quite a steam during a hard day's work.
I think a lot of them went out of favour when farming went into depression. Some could get them to go and some couldn't.
As the boxes invested in better and better tractors, the Titan was soon left behind. Eventually, it was only used to power the threshing machine and to haul it from job to job.
So it's got a family link as well as the local engineering firm is the first tractor they ever solved. No intention of selling it.
By the 30s, agriculture was in trouble again. As the Depression grew deeper, farmers went bankrupt. It would take another world war to reignite British agriculture and restart the story of the tractor.
Drop. Open up the window and jump into the blue. Things could be marvelous. Things could be fabulous soon. Oh, well, these are the days, and this is the life. There'll always be something on your mind you'll never quite find. Won't you ever make your mind up now? You'll never be sure if this is the time, if this is the moment, the end of the line. You'll never decide. These are the days, so wake up, 'cause this is the time. And you know I'm right.
Centre Parks. For a brochure, call 0990 200 200.
This man convinced more than 200,000 of you to part with over £1 billion. He promised not to take any commission, and with no salesman and low charges, he's done exactly what he promised. He is the chairman of Virgin Direct. To find out how you can start a Virgin personal pension, call us now on 0345 900 900.
The boys are rather proud of the way they've switched over from peace to wartime production. Take the manufacture of tractors, for instance. There's a real job we're putting our backs into, and we're doubling and trebling output as fast as we can go.
Produced at Dagenham, the Fordson Standard became the hero of wartime food production. Once again, women were drafted in to keep things moving.
It does your heart good to see them come off the assembly line.
They might have been rolling off the line at Dagenham, But as far as the farmers were concerned, the jury was still out on the tractor. George Field's Uncle Lester was still ploughing with horses. But in the evening, he was doing his paperwork very carefully.
He's put down what he thinks the tractor, or what he's been quoted the tractor is going to cost him. For example, he was an all-horse farm. He didn't have a fuel tank. Now, he bought the tractor, and 12 months later, there's another note here dated 19th of May 1940. The cost with the horse was £1 per acre. The cost with this tractor was 9 shillings and sixpence. That's a significant saving. So his Ferguson tractor was actually saving him quite a significant amount of money.
Uncle Lester's Ferguson Brown was the first glimmer of the tractor as we know it today. But even with the figures looking so good, the wartime government was planning a subsidy programme for farmers. They intended to make Britain a self-sufficient food producer. The tractor industry has been on a roll ever since.
I came to see him about ploughing up some more grassland.
Well, I don't know how he'll take that. That will mean a tractor, and where's the money to come from?
Well, maybe be able to fix that up for him.
Well, if you got a gun in the ground, would you plough?
Oh, yes, I'd be glad to.
Mechanisation was to be Britain's saviour. Every conceivable tractor was pressed into service in the rush to reclaim land for food production. This beast, built by Fowlers in the 30s to cultivate the Empire's sugar plantations, was about to enjoy its finest hour.
Mr. Martin, look! It's a guard tiller! Please, Bob, can I have a ride?
Okay, come along.
Farmers are always keen to see a return on their investment. Robert Crawford's gyro tiller was kept at work until the 70s.
It had the luxury, this one did, of having a cab on, but not many of them in those days had a cab, but it was an optional extra. And this is the original cab that's on this machine. Not by any means a quiet cab, but I expect it was better than being in the open air all day.
Although a figure of fun, the gyro tiller had some important features, including one of the first hydraulic lifts operating the tillers at the back. And with some models weighing in at 23 tons, it was one of the biggest farm tractors ever made. The wartime concept of recycling was new to the public, but not the farmer. In peacetime, rationing worsened, and there was a shortage of tractors. Always ready to make do and mend, Robert Crawford's father decided to remobilise this Sherman tank. Retired from El Alamein, it now had civilian duties.
We'd only got it home a day or two, and the Daily Mirror was down, wanted a picture, and of course they wanted there was a glamour on it as well, and so they went down to the local Land Army hostel down the road and got 5 or 6 Land Army girls, and there I sat in the middle of all these Land Army girls on the back of the tank. That was before all the top was cut off it.
Seemed like a good idea, but at 65 gallons of diesel a day, it may not have been the most practical tractor for the farm.
It was a Sherman with a 375 horsepower twin diesel engines, and I particularly remember it still got all the sand and dirt on it, just as it had come from the battles at El Alamein. Seems like 50 years ago, this does now. Having a ride on it again. Okay, it starts one engine up first, and that engine then starts the second engine up.
Robert Crawford is a Lincolnshire man, working at the centre of Britain's agricultural heartland. Marshall's of Gainsborough was just up the road, and this may account for Robert's loyalty to the Field Marshal. Launched in 1945, the single-cylinder diesel engine was very powerful for its time. Because they're British and different, aficionados refer to them as the Rolls-Royce of tractors.
It was a basic tractor, but it was also a very reliable tractor, a very economical tractor. They made about 15,000 of these tractors in 10 years, and we do supply spares now to a good many countries in the world, and some of those countries, African countries and various countries, they are still using them every day.
For those frosty Lincolnshire mornings, the Field Marshal has a starting sequence like no other tractor.
First thing we do, set the flywheel in position to start.
When you've got this put in, all it's doing is just making an explosion. It's known as an ignition paper, and it decides, of course, which way the engine goes. Yeah.
The giant Rizla paper plays a crucial part in bringing the Field Marshal to life.
If that's loose, you could blow it out. In fact, I've known them blow out. Yeah.
In here we've got some cartridges. Basically similar to a 12-bore cartridge, but with no shot in them, so you know, they don't shoot you, they just start the tractor up. So.
Marshal men like things to go with a bang.
This fits in this part here. That unscrews. Cartridge slots in there. We then screw the cap on the end. Give it a tap to make sure it's tight. All we do.
Sometimes on those frosty Lincolnshire mornings, the driver too would get an unexpected warm-up, as carbon used to build up in the exhaust and shower him with hot cinders. Whilst the Field Marshal looked up to date in its Dan Dare suit, over in Coventry, the modern tractor was being born.
While most other manufacturers still copy the old horse-drawn principle, still building a machine to pull an implement, the Ferguson arrives.
I just remember the lorry arriving, it backed into the yard here. The driver took the ramp, put the ramps down and drove it off and handed over to my father, who got on board his new toy and drove it perhaps 2 or 3 times round the pump trough, which used to be there, with his arm raised, mimicking the then Ferguson advert, showing a Ferguson tractor with a man driving with his arm up in the air.
The new TE20 finally persuaded die-hard horse farmers like George's father to buy their first ever tractor. Harry Ferguson's great invention was the revolutionary 3-point linkage, which meant that any farm implement could be operated from the tractor. At last, the farmer had what he'd always wanted.
There you are, neat to the last detail. That's the Ferguson, which combined with its full range of implements is the tidiest parcel you've ever seen.
With more than 50 implements, the multi-skilled grey Fergie could do most jobs on the farm.
Now things they do change as the time passes on. I'm afraid I'll have occasion to alter my song. You'll see a boy on a tractor a-going like hell. Whatever farming's coming to, there's no tongue can tell.
I think the really crucial thing about Ferguson was the extraordinary difference that the Ferguson system made to so many farms. In fact, it affected every farm who uses tractors in the world, regardless of what makes they use. And it is that extraordinary achievement, largely unsung and unknown, that has impressed so many people.
When possible, George Field continues to farm the Ferguson way. For 50 years, the TE20 has remained the template for the modern tractor. Working with the 1903 Ivel, it took over a week to plough 18 acres. By the 50s, the Fergie could do it in 3 days. Today, the JCB Fast Track can plough 18 acres in an astonishing 6 hours. These days, it's difficult to imagine a farm without a tractor. Although the agricultural industry has shrunk, the farms themselves have got bigger. 80% of a tractor's time is spent not in the field, but on the road. We are now in the era of the corporate farm, and the tractor is part of an agricultural assembly line that has redefined the British landscape.
In summer or in winter we never ought to grieve, for in the time of hardship each neighbour shall relieve. But still I think that a country life all other does surpass, as I sit here quite contented with a happy country